Good afternoon, everybody. This is Timothy Bish from the Circle podcast coming at you today with Ben Williams, a Provincetown-based lawyer who focuses on LGBTQ issues and is a founding member of Gays Against Guns. And today we have him here to discuss the headline in the news right now, which is the potential overturning of Obergefell, the ruling that allowed for same-sex or gay marriage. There is so much sensational news. It is hard to know what is real, what is not real, what we should be reacting to, and what we can do about it. So today we're here with Ben to have this conversation. What's really happening? What are the likely outcomes? And what are the things that we should be doing to prepare ourselves or to protect ourselves? So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Help us understand this moment right now for queer people in the Trump administration, specifically with regards to this ruling and what is potentially in our future.
Yeah, it's a great question. This is a really scary time for the LGBT community, for anyone really that's different in this era of kind of uniparty control by the Trump administration across the court, across the legislature, and obviously in the White House. What we're seeing right now is a variety of states, obviously conservative states, where the legislatures are passing resolutions calling for the Obergefell decision, the same-sex marriage decision before the Supreme Court in 2015 to be overturned. And obviously that's terrifying because we just saw Roe versus Wade get overturned.
Yes, we did.
And the scary part, particularly about Roe v. Wade being overturned, was that Justice Thomas, in that opinion, specifically called for decisions like Obergefell to be revisioned. So then now you have these state legislatures, I think we're at 9 as of recording right now, who are passing these resolutions in their states calling for the U.S. Supreme Court to act. The good thing I can say is that these resolutions are legally meaningless. They don't have any effect. The way that the Supreme Court makes decisions is that it has to have like a live case or controversy before it. So there would have to be a case that got to them that they accepted, where they would have to consider revisiting this decision and whether or not to overturn it. And these state resolutions are not a vehicle to do that. These are more like kind of virtue signaling exercises and ways to kind of get the base excited and continue the culture wars. But practically speaking, they have no legal meaning.
That's really, really helpful because when I go on social media or watch the news, this idea that it could be overturned feels really terrifying, especially in light of all the other things that they've been doing to our community. So it sounds to me like there would need to be other things to happen for this even to be something we should be worried about in this moment. Am I hearing you correctly?
Exactly right. There would have to be some case. There would have to be some lawsuit that happened somewhere as a result of some action. The kind of scary thing is causing a circumstance like that is probably easier than even passing a resolution like these states are doing. All it really takes is some state, to do something adverse to same-sex marriage. So, for example, you might remember when we were kind of in the marriage battles 10 years ago, there was a county clerk, Kim Davis, who refused to issue a marriage license. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen, is that someone refuses to issue a marriage license, someone refuses in some state to recognize a valid same-sex marriage performed elsewhere. A state passes a law that bans same-sex marriages. The federal government passes a law banning same-sex marriages. Something like that needs to happen, and then someone needs to sue about it. And then that lands in court, and that will start at a district court. And then, depending on how things go, it's going to go there. It's going to go to an appellate court. There's a couple levels of review in the appellate court, and then maybe it gets to the Supreme Court.
So there are a lot of people now who are married. What happens if it were to make it all the way, if they were to overturn it, and I'm a married person, what do you think is reasonable? Is it reasonable to think that my marriage can become null and void? Is it more likely that they just wouldn't issue any further licenses, but the ones that were already in effect remain in effect? Like what should we expect?
It's a really good question. There's a couple layers there, so I'll try to unpack them. The first is kind of like whether or not we think this would actually happen. The second is if a decision did come before the court and if they did overturn Obergefell, the practical effect of that is that the Supreme Court is no longer mandating that states allow same-sex marriage and recognize same-sex marriages performed elsewhere, but it doesn't necessarily mean, based on where you live, that your marriage is going to be invalid. there are going to be states that have these same kind of trigger laws that you saw in the Roe era with abortion, where when Roe was overturned, immediately it became outlawed in
Mm.
the state. There's probably going to be states that take tactics like that, where they say if Obergefell gets overturned, we're invalidating all marriages, or we're not recognizing all same-sex marriages anymore. But states like New York, states like Massachusetts, where we are, there's going to be same-sex marriage. The next challenge, of course, and you're seeing the same kind of thing from the abortion context, is, well, what happens if there's a push to ban same-sex marriage? Not just overturn Obergefell, but actually ban at the federal level same-sex marriage. How that would play out, I think, is going to be a really interesting thing to see. It would be a huge pitched battle between states and the federal government if that were to happen.
That feels clear to me. It also feels a little terrifying, like the possibilities. So, is there anything that we as individuals or communities should be doing to protect ourselves, or is it really a waiting game, waiting to see if any of these things actually happen?
It's a hard question. I mean, as a dyed-in-the-wool activist, as you mentioned, one of the original members of Gays Against Guns, I think protest is always something that we should do. I think visibility is huge. I mean, visibility, to be honest, is the reason why support for same-sex marriage has risen so quickly in the past decades. It's because now we know gay people. The conservative person that was all going to be against gay marriage, all of a sudden it's their son or their niece or their coworker that is now openly gay and married, and they've met and they've been like, oh, this actually isn't so scary of a concept. Why was I ever against this? So I think protest, I think visibility are things that we can do. I think making them have to see us is such a powerful way to kind of combat this. I don't know if you saw recently, but in Michigan, I think it was in Michigan, there was the person who was trying to lead the support for one of these resolutions calling for the Supreme Court to overturn Obergefell. There was a gay legislature that sat in the front row and made this person who was opposing same-sex marriages look directly at him and say this. And that guy, the conservative that was introducing this resolution, pretty much like ran away from what was billed as a press conference, didn't take any questions, ran out of there. And the gay legislature got right up at the mic and said, I'll take questions. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we need to see.
Mm.
So more of us in government, more us pushing those who are already in government to stand up for us just like that. Continued visibility, protest, and it sounds crazy, but we're going to be voting again soon. Elections are happening kind of off year in certain states, so there will be elections this November in certain states. I think Virginia is one. In 2 years, we'll have an opportunity to recapture the House, maybe take back the Senate, although that's a tough game. So we need to register voters and make sure people vote and educate people.
I really love this. I always find in these moments that taking some action is really powerful. It helps me to feel less like it's all happening to me or that we're all being victimized. Are there any organizations that people can go to that you think are particularly effective in helping any of these things? If I'm passionate about registering voters or raising money for LGBTQ healthcare or any of that, like what are some of the organizations you might refer people to?
There are a ton, and I think picking the one that really aligns with your interest is a really powerful way to kind of affect change. So for people who are based in New York who are curious about LGBT homeless shelters, I would say the California Center. For people who are acutely interested in the kind of issues that we're discussing with these resolutions that are happening and the possibility of litigation. These are going to be fought by groups like Lambda Legal, like the ACLU. There's ACLU branches in every single state, as far as I'm aware. So giving to Lambda Legal, they always need more resources. They come out to Provincetown every summer to do a fundraiser. There's just lots of opportunities, and I would just kind of focus on what's the most important one to you, and then head in that direction.
I really love that. This podcast is about embodiment and living more fully and authentically. I think it's important for us to find the thing that resonates most fully with us, with the understanding that everyone's going to have their own thing. And so if we all get involved, then everything will probably be looked after in a way that is equitable and making significant change. Is there anything else before we conclude that we should know in this uncertain and scary time?
I think, to the point that you kind of started us off on, is that there's all of these scary headlines and there's all of this news. You need to take care of yourself. This is such a crazy time. And I remember the first Trump administration that every single day, 15 times a day, there was a breaking news alert on my phone. And it's going to be that way for the next, 3+ years of this administration. people just really need to take a break from that
Yeah.
and digest that when they're ready to and willing to and able to, and then make sure that they're using trusted news sources. I mean, we are going to see more and more disinformation and misinformation happening, and so focusing on organizations that you can trust, nonprofits, nonpartisan, and trying to get the news, sources that are informing you and helping you understand, I think is the best thing to do. But taking a break, turning off those headlines at some point, because it will just overwhelm you.
Yeah, understanding the balance between knowing what is happening but not being overwhelmed by all the details. I do remember when Biden was elected, my biggest relief was mainly, oh, there's going to be a day when I don't hear about the president. Because in the Trump administration, there was never a day there wasn't a headline, as you just rightly said.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, it's really relaxing to think like, oh, my president's just in meetings and I don't need to.
Absolutely. I mean, I lived in DC for 12 years, 2001 to 2013. And there was a running joke every August that the local media, Washington Post and all the other outlets, they were so hard up for anything to report because nothing was happening of interest that they would do these like process stories, because they're like, I got to fill the paper with something. Nothing's happening at the White House. I long for those days. I long for those days where August, nothing happens.
Yeah, I like this idea that like, oh, it's just a lot of like, experts in a room making decisions, and I don't need to know
exactly
the ins and outs of it. And instead, with the Trump administration, it's like a sensational, sort of terrifying thing. And our queer community is under attack, which is why we're doing these segments. Thank you so much for coming on. It is the mission of the Circle podcast to help our queer community be healthier, live more fully, and this self-care is a huge part of that. So thank you for giving us some information. We're definitely going to have you back if you're open to it, because I suspect, unfortunately, we're going to need more clarity on other things as we move through this time. But thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and happy to come back.
Absolutely.